And I want to start this part out with the rest of the story, and maybe give you a sense of why, when you're working in sensitive parts of the world like that, the sensitivity of your motivation can't be front and center and plastered all over the place. And so things like business as mission and missionary and all of those sort of things are not helpful in a lot of different ways. And yet I can assure you that the reason Justin's in Iraq comes from a deep faith and a deep sense of calling. And you started out actually in a traditional missionary. So I want you to give them a little bit of an idea of your journey. So a farm boy from down Missouri.
Yep.
And gets into ministry, and how all of that thing kind of morphed into what you're doing now. Give us the short.
Wow, the short. Well, I got into ministry, realized with a mindset that I wasn't a missionary. I didn't go to Bible college. I never read a book on missions. I just had an individual in my life who challenged me to look outside of my own world and gave me a book on unengaged and unreached people groups and asked me to pray as he was leaving for Afghanistan. So I said, okay, I can do that. And then before I knew it, something weird happened and God put Iraq on my heart. And I was 20, I had no idea. I'd never met a Muslim before. Next thing I knew, I was on a plane to Iraq with an NGO. And I think I'm a pretty simple person, so God gives me little pieces at a time. And at my first trip, I had a very little piece. And then when I went there, it's kind of when I saw the opportunities that existed, and really just realized and became comfortable with I didn't have to be a missionary, that I had these skill sets as I was studying agriculture and raised on a farm. My dad's an agronomist, that I had these skill sets that God gave me that I could utilize. And that's progressed into the business world, which I've come to really enjoy.
And to put a kind of fine point on it, you were with a traditional mission sending agency.
Yeah.
You rode that horse as far as you could, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you realized that it was not a good fit.
Yeah.
And secondly, that it was not effective.
All right.
I mean, for what you were trying to do, it was neither.
It was a short-term strategy.
Yeah.
So we don't identify it with our business as a BAM type business.
Right.
We just identify as believers that our business can be a tool to resource some of the people and the places we work to lead to mutually beneficial arrangements and partnerships.
And yet we can't miss the fact that where this comes from. Why Iraq? Because God laid Iraq on his heart out of a traditional missionary conversation, if you will.
Right.
And then it begins to morph into, okay, how can I do this in ways that honor the true dignity of people, honor the true dignity of business, and honors the dignity of who God has made him to be and the skill sets that he's given. So you just jump on a plane at 21. Did you know the language?
I'd spent 6 weeks in California where we lived
That'll
with
do it.
we lived with an Iraqi family, and they just kind of fed us through a fire hydrant and learned a little bit. But my team thought it was funny that I was having my first case of culture shock in California, straight from the farm. I was scared to get on a plane and all that stuff. But.
So I just love that. And California will do that to you.
Yeah,
so
it was weird.
The moral of this story is he's more comfortable in Kurdistan than he is in California.
Yeah.
So.
And then we went to a village in Iraq, and I was at home. I was like, oh, they're agrarian people. These are my people. I can do this.
Okay.
And the city people were not real sure what to do there.
I'm going to give you some time for Q&A, but
All
there's some parts of this story that you need to hear. And so you have had the opportunity to share your faith.
Yeah, every day.
Tell us a little story about the natural ways and the fruit of your faith, your relationship with Christ, as you've been able to interact with people in this closed country.
Well, I think our approach when we go to a village, we go with an opportunity. So we meet with a village in Iraq and we say, hey, this is our business. Here's what we're doing. We have access that we think that we can partner with you to increase your productivity and your annual income double or triple. Hybrid seeds, for example, different technologies, different ways to market their products. And then, we're the first Westerners that they meet. So they want to know about our politics. They want to know about our culture. They want to know They want us to know about their culture. And then always they say, what do you think about God? And as a follower of Jesus, I have that opportunity to engage in that. And, it's ironic. They think that you're a Christian. They assume that you're a Christian, and their idea of Christianity comes from what they see on the movies and on the internet, or some of the other major companies, oil and gas companies that are operating there. So we say that we follow Jesus, and they say, okay, we've heard of Jesus. Who's he? Tell me more about that. If we say Christian, they say, okay, we know all about that. So we just take that approach, and then we end up partnering with these individuals in these villages, and people have mentioned in business and doing economic and growing together, going through struggles together. God shows up in those situations, and we've noticed that to be the case every time. So we don't feel like we need missions training. We feel like we get questioned, what do you think about God? And we get an opportunity to talk about Jesus. I don't know what else you can add to that.
And you've had the opportunity to lead people to faith.
Yeah, quite a few, yeah.
So, and you shared a story in your sermon about how that just actually kind of took off after. You got to tell the story.
Yeah, so it started with a group of guys that adopted me. I was kind of walking around Iraq lost, no idea how to even buy anything. And a group of guys saw me and probably felt sorry for me. And they adopted me. They brought me into their group. They'd been friends since preschool. And they asked those questions that I mentioned earlier. Got an opportunity to share about Jesus, and they were really open to that. Except for one guy who came from a very fundamental family, and we were in a very fundamental village. And God put it on my heart one day to share with him. My idea was to avoid him and to hang out with these other guys. And I said, well, this doesn't make sense. This isn't my strategy. And then I realized that I was sitting in the middle of Iraq, and none of this had made sense up to this point. So I should probably go with that. And I did, and God showed up. He's working on his heart. And he said, at the end of a 3-hour conversation, do you have anything else about Jesus? Books, CDs, anything? And we had, as our mission group at the time, we'd taken in 350 New Testaments with us. So I said, yeah, we can do that. So he shows up that night, and we study Matthew 1, which I had a strategy, another brilliant strategy to start at this place. It's irrelevant because I don't remember what it is, because he said, why are you starting in the middle? We got to start at the beginning. I was like, the genealogy, we're going to lose him here. And for him, it connected, as a Muslim background guy. It's like he recognized all these different people that built up Jesus through his bloodline. And then he invited the rest of the group the next day. And then we did that for 6 months, and then we were supposed to leave. And my team's like, you've been studying. They've heard the call of Christ. Ask them. So I did, and they said, yeah, we've heard, and we want to follow Jesus too, and we want to be baptized. So we did that. And then they took it from there. The best thing happened. My team left, and I decided to stay. I was 21. I was going to stay with these guys. And they said, they looked at me and said, what do we do now? We're a group of 6 believers. What do we do? We're the only believers in town first. And I called the missions organization. I said, what do I do? The thing that you said that wasn't going to happen is happening. And they said, we have no idea. So I hung up on them. And I said, what do you guys want to do? It was the best thing that could have happened, honestly. It was the best answer. We have no idea. So I went to them and said, what do you want to do? And they came up with a strategy, and they started planting the church and growing it.
Now, I've got another story I want you to tell, but let's get to a couple of questions first. Any questions? Yes.
Are you working with, or do you have a long-term plan for working with IDPs and refugees in Kurdistan to get them economically sustainable?
We've written a plan. We're a for-profit business, and we, as Christians doing our business, we decided that we would look into these refugee camps and communities and see what we could do to help bridge that gap from aid to development. So we did an asset-based assessment in a refugee camp and wrote a plan. But as a for-profit company, we don't have the margins to fund it by ourselves. So we're still trying to figure out how to implement it. And so far our strategy is to do better, be better at business, and make more money in order to do these types of things. Yeah.
And I would suggest to you that as you listen to this, there are hybrids of ways that we could work between what I would call performance-based philanthropy and business to take advantage of some of the opportunities that he's talking about there. The more we begin to think about how these things could play out in various contexts. Lindsay.
Why did you guys decide to form as a for-profit versus a nonprofit, and to operate as a for-profit versus a nonprofit?
I think for us, whenever we talk about sustainability and having that desire and thinking that the right answer in the communities that we work are for-profit, sustainable companies. And then in order for us to really assist and partner with that, we felt like we had to have that same mindset and operate in the same way. And we just feel like at the time that we had more opportunities to grow as a business and have a greater impact as a for-profit. We're also seeing the challenge of wanting to do some of this work in refugee camps, but not seeing the business opportunity there, return of investment. So trying to figure out the hybrid approach to where we can fit.
Why does that additional funding need to come through a nonprofit channel versus through an investor or, just an alternative channel?
Well, through an investor, there's not really an investment opportunity that we can see. And, I don't know how it would be received even from, whenever we talk about collaboration, we talk about collaborating with the government, universities, other NGOs, and businesses. So we don't really see an investment opportunity in a refugee camp per se for an outside investor. So developing these assets takes resources. So our assessment, I'll tell you a little bit about it. The UN managing the camp and said, how much land do you have? We have all of this land surrounding the camp. Can we use it? Yes. Okay, what about your water? How do you manage your wastewater? And in a camp, there's black water, human wastewater, and there's gray water, sink water, shower water, kitchen water. And those, in their system right now, those are blended, they blend together and they go outside. And we say, okay, there's an asset that's being wasted. You can capture that gray water and store it outside of the camp. Then you have a daily abundant resource of water and land. And then we walk through and the greatest asset, we walk through the camps and we find professors, we find agronomists, farmers, doctors, engineers, and this great wealth of resource sitting in the camp. Brilliant people simply displaced, needing that gap, needing that opportunity. And that's where we think that we can play, but we haven't got it figured out yet.
Anyone else? Questions?
Thinking of the plan that you guys have put together, what are some of the things that would develop for the refugee camp? Is it mostly agronomy types of businesses, or are there other types of businesses?
The major concern that was brought to us was, can you help us with the food security? So that's where we started. But around that, economy happens when trade happens. There's economy. And if there was an agronomy business, there would be just all of these different rings. And we mapped it out, the value chain of food aid from an outside resource. It comes into the country. Very little trade happens. But if you change the food, processed food, to a seed, and we mapped out the impact of a seed and all of the trade that happens, it's not even agriculture related. There's other business activities that happen in those 3 months whenever you plant a seed as opposed to giving someone food.
Yes.
Great. I'm so encouraged by the work that you're doing. So I would love for you just to dig in a little bit on what the business actually looks like. And, this is your chance to brag a little bit of like what's working. And I'm just curious, what your staff team looks like. And as you go to work in a village, what proposition are you offering them to access the outside market, and kind of tell that story?
Well, our business is structured. We're actually based in Seattle, Washington. So Iraq's kind of my thing as one of the partners, and maybe I focus on it more than I should because we live there. But my region is the Middle East, North Africa, and what we bring to the table as businessmen are some tools and resources. Like we said, that being an ag expert isn't enough. You're not going to have the impact. So what are some of the things that we do have access to? And what are some of the relationships and networks that we have? And that's kind of where it starts for us. So I guess at the core, we're a tech company. We have a software platform, a business intelligence platform that help us measure everything and make good business decisions. Because that's what we do with our businesses. We measure, we make good business decisions, and we've developed a software that'll help some of these really small businesses and really hard places, high risk, mitigate their risk by using good business practices. So that's one of our models. And then, so Iraq, for example, we have business people in our network, like people that work at big ag companies. And there's a big market so there's a business opportunity for that individual to sell seed, for example. So we can be a registered vendor. We can market their product lines to farmers and create access and seed technology, which then today it enables local farmers in that village to compete on the global market, because that's what they're doing. Whether they realize it or not, they're competing on an international global market, even if they're in a village tucked way up into the mountains in northern Iraq. That's their competition level. So we create the access to help them compete with that, whether it's technology or strategies, markets. So I think that's the best way to answer that question.
Yes.
Maybe I was just awed by part of your story and got distracted, but I'm trying to figure out how you went from missionary to businessman. In other words, did you start this company or did you link up with an existing company in Seattle?
I linked up with an existing company. So I came out, kind of the end of my story was I ended up getting shot out of Iraq after these local Kurds.
That was the story I wanted him to tell you.
And I realized that, that was a really short-term strategy, because I went with a team of engineers. And when they left and these local believers started playing the church, it got pinned on the one foreigner. And my activities was assisting these guys. So I hadn't developed any real skill sets at that age. I was a college student. So coming back, I linked up. I knew that I wanted to do something differently. And I over that course of that year, I realized that the fact that I am a farmer is a benefit. Like, I realized that we all have a certain skill set that we can offer to connect to some of these places. And I just decided to own that. And linked up, God just blessed me with a group up in Iowa that had started for-profit ag companies in Laos. And we're venturing into Afghanistan. And they had the capital to start a company in Iraq. So I trained with them. They taught me a whole lot. And then they helped launch our first company in Iraq. And then after that, I got connected to a different group, got connected with Business Impact Networks. I'd stayed in Iraq after we sold that first company. Our family decided to stay and look for different business opportunities, and I started a consulting company, or I started consulting for oil and gas companies as they were going into these really remote areas with no cultural skills, no language skills, and having big budgets to do work in the communities, but really no idea how to have an impact or real understanding that was important. So they would go to villages where they'd have to build roads, where people were in mud huts riding donkeys, and they would give them Land Cruisers. It didn't work very well. So our company was consulting for those companies to help with their community relations, and then also managing their CSR budgets, corporate social responsibility budgets. And during that time, I got connected with Business Impact Networks, who came out to Iraq, and they're just so further along than I was in this process, and they had actual business processes ready to go to have a greater impact than what I could do on my own. So we shared a lot of information, and they offered me a partnership a couple years ago, and that's how that happened.
And Justin's currently working on a feasibility study right now. You're in phase 1 of that. So
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the post-ISIS, as I mentioned, ISIS destroyed a lot of the economic ecosystems. So post-ISIS, we're trying to figure out our business role there. So we're just starting with a feasibility study. We've partnered with the university there, and we have 2 PhD students that are collecting data, assessing all the value chains that exist. in all the different sectors and looking for gaps. And where there's brokenness, there's opportunity. So as business people, we're assessing the processes within the processes. So your question about measuring, we measure everything all the time, everything. And that's what we're doing right now. We're in the measure phase, gathering data, measuring it, coming up with multiple business plans to launch back and start again.
And then from that feasibility study, there will become some for-profit business startup opportunities for true investment.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Several. We anticipate several because the opportunity is huge. We have millions of people with a lot of great assets and no in-country value chain. So our goal is to break the import and trade and quick transactional business and create a long-term in-country value chain.
Wow. You know, this seems to be a point to pause and say, this is what I meant. That for us pastors, we've got to create the space for young men and women like this and then get out of their way. I mean, what do I know about a value chain? I mean, this young man has become somebody that the Prime Minister is looking at and saying, help us understand our food security. You know, your presentation, Christine, what's in our hand? What's in your hand? And what I find just so interesting here is that it seems to be intuitive to him. It just, well, sure, this is just, well, anybody would do this. Any 21-year-old would this just makes sense. And I'm not sure that it is all that intuitive to some of us in that. And I just believe God has put in our midst young men and women who are not wrestling with that bifurcated secular sacred, or not wrestling with business is one thing and ministry is something else. They're not wrestling with the here and now versus the hereafter. It's just all together. And why can't we be those kinds of people? Because Jesus is the one, when we asked him what the number one thing was, what's the most important commandment? And, you know, he was wanting one thing, and Jesus said the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's two things. And, you know, we want to say, no, Jesus, just one. Tell us what the one thing is. And no, it's two things. And why do we have such a difficult time by pulling some two things together and making them one? We're the people who believe that three is one. So why can't we believe that the here and now and the hereafter is just as important, that the secular and the sacred are all part of the same thing? It's all one. And if we learn to live in that space with genuineness and honesty, will not God do things that we've never imagined before? So there's more to his story. I hope you'll take some time to jump out on the internet, listen to his sermon up at Graceway.